Sometimes it's not about the murder, it's about the message. The first time I encountered this phrase was in March of 2018. It was spoken to me by two completely different people just over a week apart. Each time, it meant something awful. I first heard the name Darren Reed around a week before I first heard that phrase. I had been called to assist on a case in another city. Though I had never heard the name Darren Reed before the day I arrived, I had heard of him by his other name, Dark Moses. This was not Reed's given name, not a reference to his hair or skin color, and until he had risen to the top of the gang culture in that part of the world, had not even been his nickname. When Darren Reed walked into a place, people parted like the Red Sea. It was said that if he walked into a crowd of thousands, crammed together in the tightest of crushes, the bodies would somehow separate, parting like the waves had for Moses, to clear a path for where he was walking. Hence, Dark Moses. Dark Moses was the rarest of creatures, a gang leader who did not fear the bullets or attacks of his competitors, nor arrests from the police. He did not, as many before him had, hunker down or remain in hiding, counting his ill-gotten gains but unable, because of the threat of injury, to ever emerge to spend them in public. Not for him, the hidden life. Moses strolled and sauntered. He could be seen in plain view every day, frequenting his favorite cafe, conducting business, and pontificating at length, giving orders and checking intake from his drug empire in public with absolute impunity and no hint of concern. Why? Because on the streets that he ruled with an iron fist, Darren Reed was less a prophet like Moses and more like a god. In Moses' part of the city, you were either paid by Moses, terrified of him, or dead. There were no other options. The police forces in the area didn't touch him because the officers assigned to his portion of the city, not to mention the politicians and high-ranking officials above them, were on his payroll. Those who were not either met unfortunate ends or, like the rest of the city's residents, lived in perpetual fear of reprisals from Reed and his minions. Not that this was an accident, Reed actively cultivated this terror, elevating what could have been simply a reputation into something more akin to a mythology. When he was picked up for assault in 2001, a charge which he incidentally got away with since the victim decided to drop all charges, a few weeks before dropping literally off the top of a multi-story car park, he explained during an interview his entire philosophy of crowd management. Over the course of an hour, veering wildly from the questions asked, as if he was deliberately ensuring that his thoughts were on record, he explained how in ancient Rome, the forces crucified criminals, leaving them hanging for days, naked and suffering, in public not only as a form of punishment, but also as a deterrent. The important thing to remember about crucifixion, especially in countries that the Romans were occupying, is not that people were scared of ending up crucified themselves, but that they were too scared even to cut those who had been crucified down. The victims were left in the sun, stinking, rotting, and feasted upon by birds and flies for days, as a challenge to the populace and a statement of control. It was as if the Romans were saying, "He's one of yours. Cut him down, bury him properly according to your customs. We dare you." Nobody ever did. That's real fear. That's real power. Those words, coming up as they did in interviews for a case that met a dead end, should have been forgotten and probably would have been had it not been for an incident that occurred a year later, and to which, in hearsay at least, Moses was linked. A local gang member named Amos Wise had been murdered. He had been leaving one of his usual hideouts when someone, alleged to have been Moses, had driven a car at full speed into him, pinning him to a wall of the building, his stomach and ribs crushed beyond repair. It's possible that Amos might have survived had the car that pinned him to the wall been reversed, releasing him, if anyone had called an ambulance or the police. That, however, did not happen. Instead, according to whispered accounts, the driver calmly got out of the car and popped a sign next to the screaming man that read, "This one is anathema. We see you. All of you. He was the most powerful man in the city. Now, he's not. If we can get him, we can get you. Nobody speaks, nobody helps. He stays here until we say he can leave. For you, he is invisible. He no longer exists." Sometimes it's not about the murder. It's about the message. Despite a police patrol car passing that exact spot multiple times a day, despite the school bus passing the spot on its route, despite it being a public place surrounded by tenement buildings, packed with hundreds and hundreds of people, the first report of the body being pinned to the wall by a car didn't come in until a month later. Amos stood upright and pinned against that wall, rotting away in full view for over 30 days. Nobody said a word. Nobody reported it. Though he screamed in agony for days, though his carcass was chewed upon by local stray dogs, his death was met with silence. When the call finally did come in to report the body, it was a refuse worker from out of state who had been drafted in to cover a shift for a shorthanded team. Beside the body, there were two others. One had been carrying bottles of water he had allegedly tried to share with the dying man. He had been shot. The other was a priest who had approached the dying man to give him his last rites, also shot dead, and left beside the one who had been declared anathema. That, as Reed would say, is real fear, real power. Over the next decade, scores of murders occurred like this across the city. Men and indeed some women who crossed Reed were pronounced anathema, a word meaning something detested or someone officially excommunicated or cursed by a pope. In every case, they were left for weeks before being reported. All the while, the rest of the community pretended they were invisible. The first time I heard the phrase, sometimes it's not about the murder, it's about the message. It was said by the local chief of police and was in reference to this practice. Now, you may be thinking, if everyone knew this guy Reed was responsible and you were brought in to catch him, then this isn't much of a case. There's no great mystery as to who committed the crimes, nor how or where to find the culprit. The point is, I wasn't brought in to catch Moses. I was brought in to find him. Despite his godlike status and ability to stroll through the neighborhood with no fear, Darren Reed had disappeared. He had last been seen in his favorite cafe, after which he had walked to his car and, it was thought, drove himself home. He never made it. Who, I was tasked with finding out, would dare? Which gang leader or rival would risk everything to take out Darren? I'd been in the city less than 12 hours when I found the answer. I'd asked one of the local cops to take me to the neighborhood, to drive me around Darren's usual haunts and show me his usual movements. We had been cruising past the cafe that Moses usually frequent when I saw the crowd gathered in front of a store window. Curious as to what had caused the commotion, I asked the officer to stop the car and got out to investigate. Unlike Moses, when I walked into a crowd, even with my badge held high, people did not part, and it took me a while to fight my way to the front. What I saw when I finally got there turned my stomach. The storefront was a butcher shop. The window was packed with meat, laid out on trays hanging from the huge steel hooks, arranged on platters and even stuffed into skins as sausages. It was not animal meat. Resting in pride of place in the center of the window was the head of Darren Reed on a silver plate, an apple stuffed into his mouth as if he were waiting to be turned on a spit. Outside the butcher's, a mustache man in a blood-stained apron, arms folded, was standing. He glanced up when he saw me wielding the police badge and with a heavy sigh put out his wrists. He knew he would be arrested. Mehmet Osmanbi had owned the butcher store on that corner of the neighborhood for 15 years. He was well aware of who Dark Moses was, what his reputation was, and what he was capable of doing. Too aware. 2 days earlier, Darren Reed, on his way back from the cafe, had become distracted whilst driving, mounted the curb, and inadvertently hit Imre Osmanbi, Mehmet's 9-year-old son. Darren had opened the car door, assessed the damage, and then, kissing his teeth, so witnesses had said, drove off as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Imre Osmanbi died later that day. The following day, when he emerged from the cafe and walked towards his car, still bearing the damage from the collision, Darren Reed experienced another collision, this time with a 50-year-old Turkish man holding a 12-inch butcher knife. Mehmet did not wait to get Dark Moses back to his shop, but instead took the tools from a bag he had been carrying, put on his apron, and butchered him as he screamed right there in the street. Then he took the pieces back to his shop and put them on display for all to see. Mehmet put up no resistance to arrest and confessed to the murder willingly. He knew what he had done and showed little or no remorse, though he did say two very interesting things in his interview. The first was a somewhat flippant remark. "You'd better get this over with quickly. You're going to be very busy all of a sudden." Before the interview was over, I was informed that the front desk had received more calls in those 40 minutes than in the past 4 months combined. People from the community who had been sitting in terrified paralysis on information about crimes committed against them finally felt free to report them. Officers were dispatched, others were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The second thing Mehmet said was a clarification. People will say this was revenge, that I did it as revenge for my boy. That's true. But I also did it for everyone living in that neighborhood, to let them know that nobody, is untouchable and that they don't need to live in fear. Sometimes it's not about the murder. It's about, I know, I said, nodding. I know.